This is the Tyre Kickers, classic car chat with Max and Matt.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Tyre Kickers, dedicated entirely to the Mercedes SL. This is a guide to the first 50 years of SL, and we'll look at the different models, the pitfalls and the rust traps, and also take one for a spin. So welcome to the Tyre Kickers Mercedes SL Summer Special. So here's the idea. We'll have a look at 5 models between the 1950s and the early 2000s. In order of their production, I'll start by looking at the 190 SL from 1954. Then it's the drop-dead gorgeous Pagoda from 1963, the R107 Bobby Ewing model from 1971 to 1989, then the Bruno Sacco-designed R129, before finishing with the R230 that took over in 2001. How about that for Mercedes model code bingo?
This is the Tyre Kickers.
Bruce Greetham has been selling SLs for over 30 years and runs Bruce Greetham's classic Benz, specialising in, guess what, classic Mercs. His unit is packed with SLs and is based next to a farm that will become relevant in a minute, in the shadow of the gorgeous Malvern Hills in Worcestershire. So the Mercedes SL has been produced since the 1950s, ever since Max Hoffman, the Mercedes importer in the USA, asked for a road-going sports car to be based on the 300 SL race car. Now we're going to focus on the slightly more affordable SLs, no Gullwings today, from the 50s 190 SL to the R230 in the 2000s. But first let's meet Bruce and find out how he got obsessed with the three-pointed star. By the way, I mentioned he's based next to a farm. It's feeding time, so you may hear some hungry cows in the background.
I was started in the heavy goods business, so I was a mechanic on trucks at the time. A lot of the bosses at the time were all driving around in the 80s Mercs, and then one happened to be an old 300T 124 estate. So that's sort of the star on the bonnet sort of gave me the glint in the eye. All the cars at the time there, the company cars were like Ford Orions and Cortina Crusaders and all those models that you saw at the time. And this 300T just stood out from nowhere. Crisp buttons, rubber steering wheel. And it was just, every time you shut the door, it was solid. And I just had that little glint. I thought, this is where I need to be with a 124. And that's really what got me into where I am.
So why are SLs so popular? Because they've been going since the 50s. It's obviously a great design in various different models, but what is it about an SL that is so popular with people?
It seems to attract young and old and male and female. It attracts across the range of everybody who wants them. They've done their time with their British sports cars and probably mopped up some oil on the driveway and thought, right, I'll get into something a bit softer ride, a roof that's just easy to use. So I think it's just a wide spread of audience who just like them, and they just seem to be well respected.
From your experience, if you look at sort of the various SL models, which do you think is the kind of best SL to go for at the moment? What would you pick?
I think the best of the bunch for me probably is the 107. I think that is the model that can give you a lot of driving confidence, and there's a lot of choice out there as well.
Just to say, there's cows in the background because you're based on a farm, but you've got a great collection of SLs. Can we go and have a look at each individual model range and work out, what's best for some people and what's best for others?
Of course, yeah. I mean, we've got the pick of the bunch here. We're starting with the 50s 190 SL, and we're rolling right through to sort of the R230, so that they're all here and the pick of the choose of what people desire to what they want to own.
You've just pulled the covers off this. It's a 190 SL from 1961 and right-hand drive. That's quite rare, isn't it? They didn't make many of these.
No, I mean, I think they made about 25,000, something like that, in 190 SLs. Obviously, a huge mark of them went to the States. They were very geared up for the US market, really. This car was a Malaysian car that came over. I knew the customer very well at the time, and it was time for a restoration. So it went through a 2-year restoration from nut and bolt. Colour changed it, so it was originally in a very light blue metallic with a dark blue interior, and the customer decided that he wanted to choose the anthracite grey with a red. So here we are now after 2 years of a lovingly restored car.
It does look fantastic. I don't know much about the 190 SLs really. What can you say about them as an ownership proposition?
You never really see many of them on the roads anymore now. I think the 190, it's a little 4-cylinder engine. It's a manual gearbox. It's a very, very 50s design car, and it drives like a 50s design car. They're very close to the steering wheel. There's no power steering. I wouldn't say the engines are underpowered. I think it was adequate for the size of the car at the time and how it went down the road. You drove it within its limitations for what it was. But they do run on carburetors, which is a Solex carburetors on these, which are very, very difficult to tune. And there's only a handful of people probably within the country who really know how to tune these carburetors. And if you don't get them right, they're difficult to start when they're hot, and people do lose confidence in them. So that's probably one of the sticking wicket with these cars is setting up those carburetors on them.
A little bit extra to look after. And what about availability? Are there many 190s around?
Yeah, a lot of them will come up through the classifieds, and you see the odd one or two poke through the auction from time to time. Obviously, most of them are left-hand drives, and they're probably ready or ripe for a restoration of some form or a sympathetic, recommissioning that they need. But I would like to see more of them on the road. I'd like to see more of them being driven around. But sadly, a lot of them now, I think they become garage queens and they become ornaments of people's collections because they're just such a handsome-looking car.
Standing next to that is possibly the most handsome-looking car, the Pagoda. Should we go over and have a look at that?
Yep, so I'll look at the Pagoda, yep. It's a 1970, so it's a 280 SL. It's a matching car, so when we say a matching car, that means the engine in the car was the one that it went in from birth, as we call it, and the paintwork was the same colour as when it was come out of the factory. So it's been completely restored. It was done back 8-9 years ago, and really once it got restored, it just sort of went into the owner's collection and never really had a shakedown. And that's the key thing with a lot of these Pagodas, is they do need to be driven once they've been restored. They are more of a driving car, moving up from a 190 SL into a 113. And I think, spend some time behind the wheel of these Pagodas. Once you get them right, they're just such an absolute joy to drive.
Lots of people are kind of into Pagodas, but they've gone up in value quite a lot. So are they still a kind of usable classic? Do people still take them out regularly?
There's a sweet spot of Pagodas which I've sort of learnt over the years and sort of owning these cars myself and driving them. There's these garage queen cars now that have been restored. The values rose quite quickly post-COVID, and a lot of people were restoring them. They were going into sort of 250, even creeping up to 300,000. And a lot of those cars have got restored now, found their way into people's collections and into their garages, and they basically turned a driving car into an ornament. And those are the cars, sadly, that you now don't see on the roads anymore. So when you do see a Pagoda out on the road, you tend to find that it's just someone's really loved it and they've lived it, a bit like an old leather jacket. You put it on, the chrome's not perfect, there's a couple of little chips on the paintwork, but they're the ones I always call the memory makers. They're the cars that you're going to go places in, and the general public will look at it and just ooze and think, just such a cool car to have on the road.
Now, 230, 250 and 280, compared to the R107, the next model, the Pagodas are quite straightforward in terms of the amount of engines and cars that were out there at the time. Have you got a preference between those three?
The 230, the very early cars, I think it had the trinkets of chrome inside, which are just around the sun visors and the door furniture, was a little bit more architect, if you want to mean. It's just very, very detailed. But they're expensive to restore, and the values sometimes won't allow you to take on a full restoration now. So a lot of the 230s tend to find their way through the auction houses, and they can slip well below the 100,000 mark. But the 280, the right-hand drive automatic cars have always sort of been the shining star really of the Pagodas, and it's the one that sort of retains the most value. Everybody hankers after that particular model. I wouldn't say it's really any better to drive than any of the others. It pops a little bit more performance side of it, but you don't buy a Pagoda for the performance. It's all about how they're set up and how they start and they stop and how they go down the road, and that leaves the 250 there. A very rare model. It's a 1-year production car. They didn't make many of them, and I tend to find that people don't tend to ask for 250s. They don't look at 250s anymore so much, and it's sad that they don't, because it's a mixture of the two cars. It's got the sort of the blend and the chrome of the 230, but it drives a bit more like a 280. So it sort of sits right bang in the middle, really. But the 250 badge doesn't sort of go back as a bit of a heritage thing. And I think it's just the pure badge that why they're looking into.
And also, autos seem to be more favoured than manuals, which is unusual, isn't it? Because it's normally the manuals that enthusiasts go for.
The manual is quite an involving car, and it allows you to probably drive it a little bit more faster because you're in control of the gears and you can hang on to the gears a bit more. They're easier to tune because you haven't got a balancer gearbox, an auto box to the car. But the autos just seem to have the edge on values. People tend to ask for a right-hand drive auto. It sort of almost suits the car in a way. But from time to time, when you do just get into a manual one of these, they are a delight to drive. It's quite, it's an old gearbox. It's quite a long throw in the box. But if you can pick a 5-speed up, which is super, super rare, then that's even better.
We were talking earlier that the mechanical fuel injection can be a bit temperamental. What would you call it? High maintenance?
Yeah, it's a very old system. If you think these cars now are 60 years old, and nothing's really changed across the range. There's a few tweaks between between 63 and 71, but not a lot really. They're a very overcomplicated fuel injection system. Some say they've come down from the aircraft side of things and they've blended that into the motor car, and you can see some of the components in there. But the cold start system, the fuel injection system, is if it's not used on a regular basis, and you don't, these cars get sit around, they can almost fall backwards. They're a car that you need to get them right, and you need to use them regularly, and they've got to the point now where you almost need an army of mechanics to keep them on the road if you don't do that, because it's such a specialist art to get these cars to run right. People have moved on from points and condensers and blended in now to a pointless injection system, where they've got the electronic ignition system on it now, which helps from starting. The cold start systems, there's about 8 components that makes a car start from cold, and that's just typical German.
Now, I'm starting to see, watching the auctions, that some of the prices of Pagodas are dipping around the 100,000 mark, which is, for the last 2 or 3 years, they've been well above that. Are prices starting to soften on these, or is there always going to be a few models that people are after all the time?
The 280 right drive cars, automatic cars, in full nut and bolt restoration cars, I think will stand the test of time. I think the right owners out there will appreciate and pay the premium for those types of cars, because they are ferociously expensive to try and restore. And I think the ones that we see out there now that are rolling through the auctions are probably some of the left-hand drive American cars, either the 230s or the 250s. They're probably average to scruffy examples. There's 1 or 2 that might slip through the net that if someone's just had it on their forecourt for a long time and the owner's decided he just got to get out of it. And the auction house is plonked, and it's sort of, sadly, it doesn't help people like me who is trying to present a car that's properly set up and it's been through the restoration hands correctly. And I think it gives people a bit of a false reading of what these cars really are and what they should command. But that's the market. It goes up, it goes down, and the good ones float to the top, and the average cars, find their way into other people.
Because these are expensive cars to restore with the bodywork, aren't they?
They are. You can invest 50, 60,000 alone just on a bodywork, paneling it and getting all the gaps right, aluminium bonnet, boot and hard top and doors. It's a different paint process between the two, and getting the gaps right on these. They were hand-built cars. They were never millimetre perfect when they were new. We make cars now in restorations better than when they were new. We expect the gaps to be absolutely micro-perfect, around the bonnet and around the doors and everything else. So the skill and the labour involved to get the panel work alone right is mammoth amount of hours, huge amount of hours.
So the 50s and 60s SLs, the 190 and then the Pagoda, can be tricky to maintain and also expensive to restore. With Pagodas, the 230s and 250s are cheaper. The fuel injection on all models can be difficult to get right. And also, don't dismiss the rarer manuals. Now, in a moment, we'll get onto the Bruno Sacco-designed R129. But first, let's move into the 1970s and start with the R107 generation that popped up in so many films and TV shows like Dallas and Heart to Heart. Okay, so let's make the move from the gorgeous Pagoda to the R107, possibly the longest production run of the SL, 71 to 89?
Yeah, it was, I think, apart from the G-Wagon, it was the longest one made. And I think that's why there's so many still on the road. Obviously, a lot have found their way to the States. A lot of left-hand drives and have found their way over there. A lot of the UK cars, a lot of them have been restored now. A lot of them have been reconditioned. and they just fit the bill. I think they've found their little niche on the road. Everybody gives that little gesture of a wave when they see a 107, and they just work. You put the key in and they just work, and they give you bundles of confidence to drive them.
So this 500, it's quite good spec, isn't it? I've noticed it's got the wipers on the headlights, which I'm quite jealous about because I haven't got that. I'd love one of those. What else has it got on it as a 500?
Well, all 500s from factory, headlamp wash wipe was a factory, that was standard for a 500, and so was cruise control. Everything pretty much from there on was an extra. So you'd have an outside temperature gauge, leather was an extra, obviously the fire extinguisher and all those bits that come with it. This one hasn't got the rear seat in this one. But yeah, the 500 just had a little edge of extras that they put them on from new. Going back to the headlamp wash wipe systems, they did fit them across the whole range on all of the SLs. It was an option you could choose. Sadly, a lot of them don't work because no one drives them in the rain and no one ever actually gets them working. So the whole mechanism completely seizes up. So to find one actually working is quite a joy to see.
Can we pop the bonnet on this just so I can have a look at the V8? I know it's kind of half open anyway, so let's have a look at that. Oh, that's quite packed into there, isn't it? It's squeezed into that engine bay. It
is. I mean, the V8s have gone all the way through the whole of the 107 range, from the 350, 450, 380, right the way through up to the 500s. But they were all the same sort of size. Ejection systems changed as they went in, but yeah, they're sort of shoehorned in there. And from a mechanical man that I've been over the years, doing various work on these, it can be a little bit tight in there. Even just changing spark plugs is quite an adventure to get through.
So there's so much choice with the R107s. There's 280s, there's 300s, 350s, 420s, 500s. What's your pick of the range?
It's difficult, really. I love the V8s, but I think they're only nice from my point of view. I've driven hundreds and hundreds of these over the years, and when you do get a glorious low mileage 500, they're super sweet. They just glide along the road. They're just effortless to drive. They're beautiful cars to tour with because the revs are very low on the motorway. You can be doing motorway speeds and you can barely hear the engine in these cars, and they're great. They are great for that. They can be a little bit nose heavy, a bit clumbersome sometimes if you're going to get up the mileage on them. But I think you can't beat a nice 6-cylinder in these. Everybody seems to hone in on the 500 because it's a V8 and they used to own a V8 and they've got to own, and V8's the only one to have. But I think when you spend a long time with these cars, you can get in a super sweet 3-litre 300 SL. I think it ticks most people's boxes. And I've even had customers over the years that have come to view a 500 and the V8 was the only one they ever had. And I said, just go and drive a 300. Just go and get in a 6-cylinder 300 and just come back and tell me what you think. And 9 times out of 10, they bought the 300. It's lighter, it's more nimble, it turns in a bit quicker, it's good on fuel, they're easy to fix, and there's more to choose from.
So in terms of engines, there's lots of choice, but there does seem to be one particular problem with these in the rusty bulkhead. Is that a big problem for these?
It's something which has really been brought to people's attention over the last sort of 5 to 10 years because it's gone with how the values have risen on the cars. And it's something which people still ask the question, what is the bulkhead? It's a panel that sits below the wiper linkage inside the engine bay. And there's a blower motor in there with 2 big drain holes. And the problem is the drain holes get blocked, it fills up with water, and then the rust kicks in, and they were never treated in there with any Waxall from factory. But yeah, I think it affects the high ticket price cars. I think you've got to take none of them for granted. It's an inspection that I do every time I go and see one for somebody, or I'm going to go and buy one, or whatever it is. But I wouldn't be too concerned on the mid to low range cars. I think you can read too much into it, I think, in a way, on the mid range cars, because there's some lovely cars out there that have been stigma with this bulkhead issue, and people have walked away from them because there's a little spot of rust in there. It's not the end of the world. If you've got really advanced corrosion in the bulkhead where you're going to have, holes in there, for instance, it's not just going to be there. It's going to be everywhere else visible on the car. So a little bit of surface rust that can be just buzzed down and cleaned up and treated. Don't worry about it. It can be done.
So if you've got a pretty good car, it's unlikely to find rust in the bulkhead, because if the rest of the car's okay, it's likely that the bulkhead will be okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've been caught out over the years, and the reasons why I've been to see a lot of low mileage cars that have been in the ownership for 1 or 2 owners, and the old gentleman's pushed the car out on a Sunday and he's washed it and polished it and he's shoved it back away again, and he's never even knew that there's drain holes in there. So if a leaf's gone down in there or a bit of debris over the years has gone down in there, and I've actually took the lid off some very, very low mileage cars and I found rust in there. So just don't take any of them for granted. So if you're going to be paying, in the 50s, 60s upwards of these cars, then a bulkhead inspection is absolutely imperative that you take that on.
Slightly more solid door sound now. We're going to the next generation. This is the R129. This is the classic Bruno Sacco design and a really pretty Mercedes.
Yeah, it's a great leap forward from a 107. It was a huge development cost to get the 129 where it is, and stepping out of a 1980s car, you definitely know you're getting into a 90s car, for instance. I always treat these cars, really, if anybody knows the W140 S-Class from that period, this really is the SL version of that car. I think it shares the same dashboard and same controls as a 140 S-Class, and they were just the pinnacle of the S-Class for me, I think, at that time. And the 129 is such a comfortable car. It's a very refined SL, and if you want something which is going to give you the more modern twist of an SL with electric roof and heated seats and air conditioning, it was all standard. They just threw everything at it. It is such a contrast between that and a 107.
Now, Pagoda prices have been through the roof for a while now. R107s are picking up behind them. Do you think the R129 is going to get dragged up and become more expensive?
The special cars that probably were the SL60s, the Designo cars, the Mille Miglias, and the nicer, bigger engine cars tend to sort of stand out a little bit more, including the Silver Arrows and the last of line limited edition 500s. They sort of opened up the parts bin and just sort of threw everything at them. And they're lovely cars. They're very well plush inside. And I would say those will stand the test of time. But the very, very early cars, the very early 89, 90, 91 cars, what I call the orange indicator cars with the 5-litre V8, the 32 valves, I think they're quite special because they're very rare to find now. And when you do find one and you find a low mileage, honest car, they got that pure Mercedes feel about them. They just got that twist from coming out of a 107 into a very early 129, and you can just see that quality still there. As they roll towards the end of the production, towards the sort of 99, the facelift cars, and they bring them out. It's a slight little drop in quality issues, I think, along the way. But if you want to put some of your money where it's probably safe, I think you've got to go up the top of the tree and probably get into the 500s and the SL60s and the Silver Arrows, but they come at a price point.
Because the Gingercator cars, I think that's the early ones, isn't it? The kind of early ones with the orange indicators. I thought most of those were suffering with the kind of wiring harness problem.
You've got to be very careful with, they've all got each model's got its own little pitfalls, and that is one of them for those wiring looms. Is biodegradable wiring loom was just something at the time which was riddled through a lot of the Mercedes, including the 124s, the 320s, that they all had that same problem. And the one, it's an expensive fix. It's into the throttle bodies, and it causes a whole heap of problems to do. So it is something which it's easily found if you know where to look on these cars. So yeah, that is a problem with the very early cars.
Now, the R129s, again, at auction, you can pick these up for sort of 8,000, 9,000, 10,000. Would you advise that, or are there common problems in these that can really trip you up?
I think you can buy them even cheaper than that. They sadly, some good cars have gone through auctions lately, have dragged over the line of 4,000 and 5,000, and quite good cars on good mileages. They're there for a reason. That's what I think. They're a car which either they haven't been able to shift through the classifieds. You can't really test to see if everything's working properly. These cars have got so many electronics on them. The roof's a big one, as we all know, and there's various different rams that are all doing different things, and all the seals can go in the rams. You can't pick those things out at an auction. The heated seats, you might find that the base might work, but the back doesn't work. And they're all the things you're going to find when you get home. And when you want to rectify all those things, it's not just a couple of £100. You could be running into a couple of thousands of pounds. So I think you've got to buy with caution at that level. And I think you've got to expect, if you're paying that sort of price tag, that you're going to come away with few things you've got to fix.
And common problems on these, you've mentioned the roof, because there's lots of bits of hydraulics that work in there. What else goes wrong with it?
The batteries can drain on them. The battery sits in the boot. It's a big battery on these. You've got to be very careful that you don't jump start them, because it can cause issues to the roof control module. It ends up causing problems with those. I've noticed over the years that the late cars, I sort of call them the Chrysler ones, if you want to call them, which is the sort of the turnover years, they did suffer with quite a lot of corrosion underneath, all the wishbones and suspension components and all the exhausts.
So that's late cars from 98?
Yeah, the late cars from 98. And you tend to find the catalytic converters were gone on the V6s. They used to rattle on those as well, and you can't get them anymore. So that's causing an issue. But mechanically, really, on these, all of the engines have been very good. The straight 6 320 and 280, great engine. The V6, the 112 V6 engine, unbreakable they are really. And then so they're all strong engines. I think it's the electronics that are gonna cause issues with the 129s.
So no preference between the straight 6s, the V6s, or the V8s?
The V8's glorious. You don't get me wrong. It's got bundles of power. The 32 valve, the earlier engines were just so much torque in them, and they're just glorious to drive. They're like a drop of juice. So you've got to expect that. I think the 113 V8, which is the facelift engines they put in at the end, I think they seem to be a little bit more clinical. It's sort of a word that I use, that it just seems crisp. You can see they've gone down the emissions route and just sort of cleaned them up a little bit and took away that hardcore Mercedes sort of 32 valve sort of engines. The V6 for me is probably the pick of the bunch if you're going to do a lot of driving. They're reasonably good on fuel. They don't break. They're just absolutely bomb-proof. Go anywhere car. They put them through all of the Mercedes range, through the MLs, S-classes. They all shared that same engine, and it did work very, very well. So I think a V6, don't worry about the mileage. They'll rack up massive miles on them, and they just work.
Do you think this is going to be the next big classic? Because we've seen the Pagoda become the classic. Now the R107 is a classic. The cows are agreeing with me. Do you think the R129 is the next big thing?
I think there's too many of them made, but never say never, as I say, because how many conversations have I had when people have walked into the showroom and said, God, I remember when I bought a Pagoda 20 years ago and you could pick up one of these for 30 grand, and now we're looking at a 129 that are, £8,000 and £9,000, and is that car going to reach the Pagoda? I don't think it will. Personally, I think it's a different generation of buyers that are coming in now who are going to buy these cars. So personally, I would probably lean to say that the pick of the bunch of those very last cars may well increase in value, but I don't think they're going to follow the Pagoda now. I think there's too many of them made.
The R129 is a cheap car now, and as Bruce says, there are lots of them around, but really interesting about his engine choices. Personally, I've always liked the V8 500 SL with the M119 engine, roughly from 1996 to early 1998. But Mercedes fans will debate the best engine until the cows come home. Oh, hang on, they have. Right, back to the showroom for the final model of SL. So next, we've been through the 190s, we've been through the Pagodas, the R107s, the R129s. Next, it's the R230. I get the impression from the internet they seem to be quite complicated. What's your expert opinion of that?
Yeah, I've not spent a huge amount of time with the R230. I think they're a very pretty car, but they do come with some worrying times, I think, with those cars, especially on the earlier cars now. I mean, they're getting on now, they're 20 odd plus years old. The water ingress that you get through the boot, they leak through the back window. Even with new seals, they still seem to leak. So if you've got one left outside, the chances are that you're going to get an ingress of water in the boot. You've got all the electronics on the left-hand side. They sit on a suspension bed of foam. The foam gets wet, all the condensation gets into it. One, you can't get in the car, and then when you do get in the car, you've got an array of Christmas tree lights on the dashboard. The batteries go flat, and it's just little stupid little things like that, really, that can just spoil someone's ownership with these cars. I'm not saying they're bad cars, and there's probably many people out there that don't experience these problems. And I have sold one recently. It come from a collection. It was always dry stored, and it was always kept on a trickle charger. And I think that's the key. You've got to nurse them. I think you've got to really make sure that you either use them all the time, and if you don't use them, then you've got to make sure you keep them somewhere in the dry, keep the batteries topped up, and turn the engine over and keep everything moving and exercise them.
It's such a shame, isn't it? Because they're so achingly cheap at the moment. You see them on the classifieds and you think that's an absolute steal. It's sub MGB money for these.
It is, and it's very tempting when even myself, when you look and you see a beautiful SL 500 on there, and then panoramic roof, and carbon fibre this, and two-tone leather this, and great colour combinations, and they're sub 10,000. You think, this is just such a lot of car for the money, but I don't fancy being outside some hotel in Italy and I go out there in the morning and it doesn't start, because of the issues that I've just pointed out. So
we're surrounded by SLs. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience. You're a big fan of them, clearly. What would be your pick of the entire kind of 70-year SL range?
Big one, that really. We all love the 50s and 60s glamour of the SLs, and they're great. They're beautiful, and owning cars from that period is a nice thing to have. I love the glamour and I love the sound and all what comes with the Pagoda. I think they're the pinnacle SL for me in a way in terms of how they look. But I always still keep steering back to a 107. And the reason's been of that. I like to do a bit of touring in the cars. And I know I can get in a 107 and it doesn't really matter what engine you really get in them. You're going to put the key in and it's going to get you to that destination. They've still got the chrome. And they've still got that old sort of 70s, 80s sort of look about them. So I'll probably, as much as I love my Pagoda and I think it's absolutely fantastic and I'll keep it for as long as I can keep it, I've just succumbed to buy another 107. I've gone back to a 107. I've sort of come full circle. It always makes me smile when I get back in a 107. It's just the memories I've had with them and the years I've spent with them. And, you can still get the parts from them. They're not massively expensive from a mechanical point of view. I think the chrome work and the cosmetics and the trim, they are expensive, and that will continue to be like that. So probably a 107 is the best of the batch, really, for me.
And bearing in mind you've picked a 107, which engine and gearbox have you picked for that?
It's funny, I've gone right back to basics. I used to own a beautiful 500 with all the options and all the bells and whistles in probably one of the nicest colour combinations. I loved it. I went across the continent in it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. But I've gone right back to a basic 280. I just wanted the absolute simplicity of a 107. And I just think, the 280 was sort of those early, it was a 70s engine. It came out in, 1974 due to the oil crisis in America, and they brought out this 280. It's quite a revvy little engine. It just goes on forever. It'll do 1 million miles in the damn thing if you have it all. They're cheap to buy. There's a heap of them for sale. So I've gone right back to basics. I don't want no air conditioning. I don't want no heated seats. I don't want nothing. I just want a pure 107. So I've gone for a 280.
So the R107 is emerging as Bruce's favourite SL. It's classic enough to know you're driving something old, but with a working heater and brakes. Whereas the R230, and I suppose to an extent the R129, are still a bit too modern to be classic cars. The R107 is a great compromise classic. It's got the looks and the chrome, but not the high maintenance bills of the Pagoda. It's old enough to make other classic car drivers wave, yet still cheap and plentiful enough to be a good buy. So let's take one for a drive. So we're just going out for a little spin in an R107. What is it about these cars, these models, do you think, that makes it a good all-round SL?
I mean, I've just jumped in here now, I put the key in, and without any hesitation, the engine's fired up on all 6 cylinders. And I think that, you select the gear, a lovely, selective, firm push into drive, and they just, you get in a 107, and it just gives you huge bundles of confidence straight away when you drive. And there's going to be no dramas, there's going to be no sort of hesitation of issues and problems that you may well get with some of the 50s and 60s cars. So I think that just gives a nice balanced all-round classic car feel. And I've always sort of got in a 107, and I've never really had any doubt that I'm not going to get there.
What should you look out for on an R107 then? What are the kind of things that you need to be looking for when you're thinking of buying one?
Well, we all know that they can suffer with rust. All Mercs can be very, very rusty, and you got 107 is no exception. Body rust around the lower of the doors and the edges of the bonnet, bulkhead as we know. But externally, it can put people off very easily because it's an expensive fix to put right. Mileage, don't be too concerned on the miles. They will cope with big mileages, these cars. Having said that, neglect. These cars can easily neglect services very easily because it's just the way they're made, and they're bomb-proof and the way that they're put together. So they can skip many services if you're not careful. So you look in the service book and you could see easily 30,000 before anything's really gone on with it all. But once they reach that cusp of issues that go wrong with them, then you're staring down a big bill of suspension bushes and timing chains and everything else that comes with it. So get a nice history. Don't hang on the wall. It's got to be absolutely stamped every single year. Don't worry about that. These cars will easily rack up big mileages, but you've just got to be very aware that if you get one that's the wrong side of good, it's going to cost you.
Like any Mercedes, it can be expensive, but there are plenty of parts and specialists around to look after the R107. After all, I've got one myself, a 1987 300 SL in signal red, and so far it's proved to be a great classic. The auto gearbox is a bit slow, plus as heavy cars they can eat suspension parts. And of course rust is always an issue, although after 1986 they were galvanised. However, I think the Pagoda is much prettier, and definitely my favourite SL if money was no object. But they are so expensive these days and relatively still rare, so I'm not sure the prices will go down that much. But can anything beat a Pagoda top down on a sunny road as the ultimate classic? It's not just a good looking car, but also sounds great as well. I'll leave you with the sound of one of Bruce's Pagodas, a 250 SL with a slightly fruity exhaust. Thanks for listening to this SL special. Don't forget to get in touch, and see you next time on the Tyre Kickers.
You can get in touch with Max and Matt via our socials. We're at the Tyre Kickers UK on Instagram and the Tyre Kickers on Facebook.